Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the final sermon preparation workshop of 2025. And what a year it's been.
Drum roll. Yeah.
Drum roll. We are almost at Christmas Day, and we are still going strong. Sam, it's good to be with you. How are you?
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Are you feeling festive now?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the major opposite of the exercise is there's more presence on the incoming than the outgoing, and obviously that remains uncertain right down to the wire. So
True. We have a lot to do today, folks, because it is Christmas and there's going to be some breaks involved. Some of us might be having a little bit of time off, which does mean that we today are going to try and give a whistle-stop tour of the first Sunday of Christmas, Epiphany, and the baptism of Christ. So we're going to go on a real journey and we're going to jump straight into it. As always, if you are thinking about any of these days and you might be preaching on them and you're watching live, do comment in the chat. They come straight through to us and we are happy, excited even, to answer your questions or at least talk about them. So Sam, let's begin with Christmas 1.
So I think you've got a straight choice on Christmas 1. I mean, I don't regard the divert to 9 lessons and carols or the everyone bring their favorite present and talk about. I don't take those as options. Hope that's no disrespect to anybody. I think you've got a straight choice. You either go into the grisliness of the Herod story, or you stay with the theme of the incarnation.
Yeah.
And if, like me, you think the incarnation is the center of theology, indeed is the reason for creation, then you've really got to do the second. It just seems so strange to me. I understand the sociology of it, I think, but it just seems so strange to me that the church, which really beats everybody up about celebrating Christmas too early during Advent, then doesn't celebrate Christmas at all.
Yeah, starts Christmas by talking about the massacre of children.
But also, the clergy go on holiday or whatever. But yes, that's right. So we're going into talking about Jesus as a refugee to Egypt. We're talking about the way Herod replicates Pharaoh. We're talking about the curious mercy of God that spares Jesus, but all the other innocents are slaughtered. We're talking, if you like, about the historicity, in the sense there isn't any record of this as a historical event, and more interestingly, we're potentially talking about Rachel weeping for her children, which is a line from Jeremiah referring, to my best understanding, to the demise of the northern kingdom under the Assyrians and the demise of the southern kingdom of Judah in the Babylonian exile. So you find yourself with all of that, but my preference would be to actually go back to the rather scanty leads that we get in the readings. I suppose scanty, because Hebrews is about the phrase of, I think it was, I'm showing my ignorance here, I think it was Gregory of Nazianzus who said the unassumed is the unhealed. Somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong. Anyway, one of the early theologians, and I've forgotten who now, said the unassumed is the unhealed. In other words, if you take a very soteriological view of the incarnation, Jesus came to die to save us from our sins, then he can't save us from our sins unless he utterly embraces the whole of our human nature. And that's what this Hebrews passage is about. It's about his full shared is the key word in verse 14. He himself likewise shared the same things. So, it's a very theological sermon about how Jesus shares every aspect of our humanity. And in a sense, the what you're doing with Christmas 1 there is you're making it fill the first 12 years of Jesus's life.
Yeah.
Until we get him as almost an adult in the temple at the age of 12 in Luke's gospel. But we have nothing in between, and yet this Hebrews passage is in a sense talking about his full humanity. Verse 17, he had to become like his brothers and sisters in every respect. Now, that's very soteriologically driven. What I mean by that is it's very much focused on how he makes a sacrifice of atonement for our sins. And, I've obviously written extensively saying that I don't think that's the only or even the best way of understanding Jesus' coming. But leaving that aside, the full embrace of our humanity by Jesus seems to be worth more than one sermon a year. So why not give one the second Sunday? But I say not only in jest, because you do think about who your congregation are. So your congregation are, number one, the people that didn't make it on Christmas Day. Number two, the people that are staying with relatives in the area and are desperate to get out of their relatives' home, and so desperate they want to come to church. And number three, visiting clergy who are having a Sunday off after Christmas and do not want to hear some second-rate nonsense. They really want to hear the best you can do. So give them the best you can do.
That's good.
So that, I think, I'm not going to say a lot about Isaiah 63 because although I suppose there is something interesting to say about Isaiah 63, and that is to say in verse 9, it says, "It was no messenger or angel, but his presence." So this is the question of, was Jesus really God? Was he was he made? Was he anointed at his baptism? Did he sort of become God because he was resurrected, or was he God all along? Obviously, I take the extreme view that he was so much part of the Trinity without not being fully human, but he was so much part of the Trinity that, that his coming to be incarnate was the central fact that dictates all other facts. But clearly, the messenger and angel controversy is around. It's a bit strange in some ways to locate that in Isaiah, the Old Testament, but we do have the tradition of having the three readings, and so they've done quite a creative job in finding that text. But you want to talk about presence, and for me, presence is the first of the 8 dimensions of being with, and so I've written a lot about presence. But and obviously there's a pun there in terms of Christmas presents, but that's not necessarily terribly helpful. But Christmas is significantly in our culture about driving across the country or flying to another country to be with people. So presence is a big theme of Christmas on a personal level as well as a theological level. So I think that there's plenty to talk about in each of the readings. Really, you don't just have to do the heart searching about immigration policy, stroke oppressive regimes, which I think is probably very familiar territory for a lot of preachers.
Yeah. Look, just for clarity on the in the gospel passage, then the Matthew, is there aspects of that passage specifically that you would use to give the more incarnational message, or do you think it's either the Hebrews and use that for that message?
Yes, yeah, no, I think if you're going to preach on the gospel, you have to go through. If you like, the only way in which there's an overlap, I think, is the sheer vulnerability of Jesus, and that isn't in some ways really highlighted by this. Matthew 2 must be as saturated with with Old Testament prophecies as any chapter in the Gospels. I think we keep getting these as it was predicted and stuff. Not least that notorious 2 verse 23, he will be called a Nazarene, which no one's been able to find anywhere in the Old Testament. In some ways, the interesting thing about that is that there wasn't an Old Testament at this time. What counted as scripture was not a settled matter.
Yes.
So that may well appear in a text that we no longer have.
Yeah. Quite.
But even so, it's rather strange,
Yeah.
because nobody's been able to find that line. So I think it's the fragility, the vulnerability, the entrusting of the baby, the identity with our real circumstances of violence, of migration, the most difficult things. That's the line you take if you were going to use this passage.
Yeah. Great. Good. Shall we push on then?
I suppose the last thing to say about that is that while I've been pretty hard on people who go easy on the first Sunday after Christmas, I'm saying don't go easy theologically. I'm saying it doesn't have to be a full length. A homily is absolutely fine so long as it's theologically rich, I would say.
Yes. Yeah.
People don't necessarily want a long service on the Sunday after Christmas, but they want a real service.
Yes. They don't want something that feels phoned in.
Well, I've just been to so many as a traveller.
Yeah.
Often having that, and they've often had a carol service or something, and not had a Eucharist or a sermon or whatever. And I think, you can do a bit better.
Shame. Yeah. Good. Okay.
So we've really got two humdinger Sundays, as theologically here, coming up. So that's to say the Epiphany. I'm not really counting the second Sunday after Christmas Day. I'm not sure who celebrates that, but it's one of those things that's in the lectionary, but I'm not sure anyone really takes any notice of it. So I think the Epiphany is a big Sunday. In some traditions, it's right up there with Christmas and Pentecost and Ascension Day and so on.
Yeah.
And I never get tired of preaching on Epiphany or on the baptism of Christ, which we'll look at in a few moments' time.
What is it about Epiphany then for you that?
I think that, the Matthew 2 reading, which we might start with, is so rich. There's so many dimensions to it. So for me, the sort of sermons I've enjoyed preaching on that are, first of all, the sense that it is the definitive passage about Christianity and other religions. And the classic shape of the passage, as I portray it, is that other religions, that's say the stargazing of the Magi, got them to Jerusalem, but only the Old Testament got them to Bethlehem. So that sense that they get very, very close, but not there. Or that they get to the king, but they don't get to the baby, is another evocative way of putting it. So another theme that I've taken similarly with science. You can see them as the first people of other faith in the New Testament, but you can also see them as the first scientists. And likewise, science can answer some questions, but it can't answer other questions. I'm actually going to be talking about that at the Epiphany carols the following week with the same readings. Another line that I've taken at Epiphany, and I think it appears in my book, How Then Shall We Live, is what I call the triangle of this story and the story of the previous week. Maybe this would be a good sermon for actually the first Sunday of Christmas, but to me it's a New Year sermon really, which is and I first evolved it in my little church in Norwich, where I did most things sitting on the floor with 15 or so people of mixed ages and abilities. But we got out a sort of ribbon and a triangle, and everybody had, I can't remember what they had, but they had a sort of a circle of some kind in their hands. And one corner of the triangle was called Bethlehem, the place of danger. One was called Egypt, the place of escape, and one was called Nazareth, the place of nurture. And everybody was invited to say, they had two circles actually, where in the triangle they'd been in the previous year and where in the triangle they were hoping to be in the next year. And hoping, say they had a parent who was close to dementia or something like that, they were anticipating what the year was going to bring for them. So it wasn't just, I'm going to go to Honolulu and be on the beach all the time. It was realistically what they were hoping for and anticipating, and it led to a very moving. It's great for a retreat or something. A very moving sharing, because it's not like one of those is the right one. Everybody's lives are a mixture of escape and danger and nurture. And so, and I basically then concluded by saying that, the job of faith, of the church, is to keep people within the triangle, not to take a view on where the right place in the triangle is. And some of those places are chosen and some of those places are imposed. So it's been a very fruitful way of talking. So, and another way, I think, of talking about, I think my favorite ever sermon on Matthew 2 actually more or less went into humbler faith, bigger God. And it was about 4 kinds of revelation, because in some ways this is the definitive scriptural passage about revelation. And it contains all the different kinds of revelation. So there's general revelation, that's to say, stars moving in the heavens, everyone can see it. Personal revelation, where they get the dream. Scriptural discovery, with the witness of the scribes, and so on. And I can't remember what I called the 4th one, but it's in, I think, the final chapter of Humbler Faith, Bigger God, if people want to find it there, or it probably was preached here. I can't remember, I'm afraid. Like 7 or 8 years ago, but I thought that was one of my better sermons. Anyway, so I never get tired of preaching on this passage. It's always keeps on giving. And then if we look briefly at the Ephesians 3, you just have to look at how often the word mystery comes up, certainly in not just in the first half, actually throughout the passage. And that sense that revelation, that it's a distinction I often make, not original to me, but fairly foundational in a lot of my books, between a problem, which is something we solve or fix, and a mystery, something we enter and discover.
Yeah.
And in the end, faith is about discovering mysteries. And I think you can say the difference between science and faith isn't that one's right and the other's wrong, but the one's about solving problems and the other one's about entering mysteries. So there's a very conciliatory kind of line to be taken there. Isaiah 60, to say that it's not good for anything but other than furnishing most of the imagery of the Magi story is probably a bit harsh, but a multitude of camels, young camels from Sheba will come. They'll bring golden frankincense. You can see where nations will come to your light, kings to the brightness of your dawn. You can see how the Matthew 2 passage is constructed out of Isaiah 60.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't have to be a genius to work that out.
No, certainly not.
So that's Epiphany.
Yeah, that's pretty comprehensive. I'm not gonna lie. It's a revelation to me, actually, just hearing you say this today, that I'd always, the popular image in my mind is always the star leading them all the way to the stable. That's the kind of popular image on the Christmas card, as it were. But actually, it's fascinating to see that actually the journey is the star gets you that far, and then the prophecy. There's more at play here, but they're all interesting and interconnected.
I think that's because our scriptural knowledge is more from nativity plays than it is from the Bible.
Yeah.
It is worth reading these passages quite carefully. But I do also, one of the very first sermons I ever preached on this passage was called You're a Star, and was about how we become ones who draw the attention of the world to Jesus by hovering over the place where he is born today. And I think, as a vocation for St. Martin's, the church that you and I serve, I think that's a nice vocation to say our job is not to be the baby, to save the world, as it were. Our job is to be the star that hovers over the place where the baby is doing what only the baby can do. And so that the aim of our work is not to be so competent or so full of ourselves or, so good at publicity or so good at public appearance or whatever, that we can con ourselves that we're the baby.
Yes.
But just to be content to be the star. And sometimes, and I think it can be very inspiring for a parent of a wayward child, of a wayward sort of 20s or 30s or teenage child, to feel their job is to hover over Bethlehem, even when that child ends up in Jerusalem for their own reasons. I think that can be very pastorally significant for people to feel that sense of vocation.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. Well, let's continue, shall we? On to
Baptism of the Lord. Another again, this is like sort of Advent Sunday and the Sunday after Ascension and the Sunday before Christmas for me, which I think are 4 Sundays that always exceed expectations theologically. There is so much there. I'm not sure I'm going to say a great deal about Acts 10, that they really were scratching around for something in Acts that said something about baptism, and it gets like half a line in verse 37. So I think I'm going to skip that. But so if we start with, there's the simple sermon, and I'm not dissing the simple sermon, because sometimes it's a all age service, or there's a baptism going on, and you don't want a long service, whatever it might be. And the simple sermon, I think, is to look at Matthew 3 and just say, well, look at the last verse, the last 2 verses. Verse 16, the heavens are open to him. Then God's Spirit comes upon him. And then a voice says, "You are my beloved child." And so again, beginning the year to say, or at a baptism, as I have preached a sermon on baptism saying exactly this, there are 3 things that happen at baptism. The heavens open to you, little Johnny. God's Spirit descends upon you, and God says, "You are my beloved child." If you think about the role of a godparent's job is to remind the child at different times over the course of the rest of their life that heaven is open to you, God's Spirit is in you, and you are God's beloved child. And you might lose sight of one or more of those things. But if a godparent can remember those 3 things based on these 2 verses, they've done their job.
Yeah.
So that's the homily. That's the kind of the brief thing to say. I mean, I think it would work very well at a wedding as well. I've never preached that sermon at a wedding, but I think it does the job very well at a wedding.
Do you think this is also, going back to something you were saying earlier, is this, or would you see it as a helpful opportunity to also talk about that, I guess that sort of the ontological nature of Christ, of Jesus, because this moment is held up as some people as like, oh, that's the moment he became God, and things like that. Would you use that as an opportunity?
I think you could. I do remember hearing at least one sermon, probably more, but when I was an ordinand, somehow you listen to sermons more as you are yourself. When you're thinking a couple of years' time, this will be me. And I remember hearing a sermon full of angst about why Jesus had to be baptized, and ending up not really in a very convincing answer. And I sort of thought, well, if you didn't have a clear thing to say, why don't you preach on one of the other passages? I think that's it. I'm not saying it's a have you stop beating your wife question, but it's a difficult question to answer. And I think the problem is in the word "have to," because it somehow suggests a limited notion of baptism, that baptism is a thing that washes away sin, and therefore if Jesus wasn't a sinner, why did he have it? Rather than something that focuses on baptism. Well, I guess this takes us to the Isaiah 42, which, I would want you to think seriously about preaching on Isaiah 42, because this is just a stellar passage to preach on. It, needs a bit more work, but but it tells you it's the kind of indispensable background for understanding the baptism. I'd much rather hear a sermon on Isaiah 42 than someone angsting about whether or not Jesus had to be baptized.
Sure.
And the reason why I don't like the did Jesus have to be baptized stuff is not just the limited nature of baptism. It's a very decontextualized idea of baptism, because fundamentally what Jesus is doing when he comes to the Jordan is to say, Israel is still in exile. I am coming to the place where Israel first entered the promised land. I'll take it from here. And you don't get any of that if you just see baptism as a matter of with Israel not in the story, if you like.
Yeah.
And so what you see here is this is Isaiah 42. What does that mean? That means it's the first of the 4 servant songs in Isaiah. Why are the servant songs in Isaiah important? Because they change everything. They transform Israel's notion of God, what I'd call from a God of for to a God of with, from an almighty and powerful to a suffering servant. They are transformative. They, in a sense, are the epicenter of the Old Testament and the central discovery of exile. And so, I did preach a sermon on this about 3 years ago, I think, called In the Beginning, which probably covers most of what I'd want to say. But just to go over the main points, I think it offers a wonderful description of leadership. This is a very calm picture. It's a very kind picture. It's a very persistent picture. And it's very concerned for those on the edge of society. So, we've got a real vision of something we could call justice there.
Yes.
But we've also got love. My servant in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. I've taken you by the hand and kept you. This is real tenderness.
Yeah.
And then, in a sense, in that context of the suffering servant, of this tender notion of justice, righteousness, as it's called in the Matthew, fulfilling all righteousness passage, Jesus is taking on the mantle of Israel. In Isaiah 42, it says, I put my spirit upon him. In Matthew 3, it says, the Spirit of God descends upon him.
Yeah.
Here is my servant, my chosen, whom my soul delights. In Isaiah 42, this is my son beloved, with whom I'm well pleased. There is a correspondence between these two passages. It's not without significance. So you've got service, you've got justice, you've got God, that sort of sense of it's a personal pronoun, it's obsessive. And then you've got new, you've got that sense that Jesus completely inhabits the whole of the tradition of Israel, and yet this is something new. This is the new relationship between God and the world. And as we get it significantly, as Isaiah 49, which will be in the following week's reading, this is a new relationship with God, which now includes the Gentiles.
Yes.
So I think it's still appropriate on the second Sunday of the year to say it's a new year, it's a new beginning. And I think, if you resonate with those words, servant and justice, God and new, you can invite people to see themselves in this story and say, in what ways is this year going to be one in which I'm called to be a servant, to exercise justice, to draw close to God, and to do something new, or let God do something new in me. I think a personal call is appropriate. So I hope I've shown why I think preaching on Isaiah 42 is much richer than simply talking about baptism in the abstract of the New Testament.
It feels as well. It feels to me like it's sort of offering, in a way, a kind of model for, model for evangelism, in a way.
What an interesting thing for St. Martin's to be committed to.
But yeah, I find that, I don't know. I just find that
very much so.
Yeah, like we're going to spread this. This is going to reach the world, but how are we going to do this? We're not going to go around fixing everything, necessarily.
No,
Yeah.
I 100% agree. Yeah, it's very nice.
Good. Well done.
Whistle stop.
Very good job of getting through all of that. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you all for joining us this year. It's been a brilliant year of some preparation.
We couldn't have done it without you.
We will be back in the middle of January. I can't remember the date now off the top of my head.
It's so far away that nobody can possibly get their head around it.
We hope you have a really, really joyful, peaceful, and wonderful Christmas. And
we'll see you on the other side.
On the other side, indeed.